The last thing she said to me was 6 words, delivered through a cracked bathroom door at 8:47 on the morning of our wedding. She said, "I cannot do this to you." I said, "Wait." She was already gone. I am telling you this story from 3 years after that morning. I know how it ends. I know every moment that led to that bathroom door and every moment that came after it. I am going to reread it for you the way I have been rereading it for 3 years. Not because I am still inside the grief, but because I finally understand what I was looking at the whole time and could not see. My name is Jonah Mercer. I was left at the altar by the woman I loved, and I never stopped loving her. But the version of that sentence that I believe now is different from the version I carried for a long time. Stay with me, because this is not a story about being abandoned. It is a story about what love looks like when both people finally tell the truth, and what happens when they find each other on the other side of it. I am at a wedding, not my own this time. My college friend Marcus is getting married in the garden of his parents' house in the country, a long drive from the city, and I am standing near the bar with a glass of something sparkling that I am not particularly drinking, and I am watching the guests arrange themselves for photographs, and I am thinking, I know how all of this feels. Know exactly how all of this feels. Marcus is the happiest I have ever seen another person. His wife, her name is Saren. She is a marine biologist who laughs at her own jokes before she finishes them, and whom he has been in love with for 6 years, is across the garden being photographed with her mother and sister, and every 30 seconds or so Marcus's eyes find her as if checking that she is still there. I know that feeling. I had it once. Her name was Vivienne Clare, or rather, her name was Vivienne Halbrook then, and she was going to become Vivienne Mercer, and I was going to be the person whose name she took, and we had spent 14 months planning the specific afternoon that was supposed to make all of that official. She never walked down the aisle. I am telling you this from 3 years later, which means I have had 3 years to go back through every moment and reread it with what I know now. This is the specific cruelty and specific gift of hindsight. You cannot change what happened, but you can finally understand it. And understanding something, I have found, is its own kind of release. Not freedom, not closure, which is a word I find almost entirely useless, but release, the ability to put something down after you have understood it. I have been putting this down for 3 years. I think today, Marcus's wedding day, 3 years after mine almost was, I am finally ready to finish. So let me take you back. Let me take you back to the beginning of Vivienne and Jonah, which started at a birthday party 4 years ago, and which I am now going to walk through slowly, catching every moment I looked at and missed. The first time I saw her, she was arguing with someone about a novel, not politely, not the performative disagreement of people at parties who are actually agreeing with each other while appearing to debate. She was genuinely, specifically, impassioned. She was saying, but you cannot read the ending and retroactively remove the weight of the middle. The experience of reading it is the point. The ending doesn't undo the journey. And the person she was arguing with was trying to explain that the twist made everything before it feel cheap, and she was having absolutely none of it. I stood at the periphery of this argument for 4 minutes. Then I said, she's right. The person arguing with her looked at me. She looked at me. I said, the ending is not the story. The story is the story. The ending is just where it stops. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, exactly. And she turned back to the other person as if I had given her ammunition, which I suppose I had. We ended up talking for 2 hours, then 3. The party emptied around us, and we stayed in the corner by the bookshelves. We talked, and I kept thinking. She finishes her sentences in ways I don't predict. She laughs at the specific things that are actually funny. She has opinions that she holds firmly and adjusts willingly when given a real reason. I know now what I was experiencing. I know now that I was looking at her and seeing, in real time, a person who was going to change things for me. I know now that I was right. What I did not know, what I could not see, looking at it from inside, was that she was also, on that evening, beginning to feel something that she did not yet have the language for, something that would take her 2 years to partially understand and 3 more years to fully articulate. I did not see it then because I was not looking for it. I was looking at a woman who argued beautifully about novels and who made me want to keep talking. I was not looking at what she was carrying. I am looking at it now. Marcus's best man is making a toast. He is saying something genuinely funny about the early days of Marcus and Severin's relationship, a story involving a misidentified species of jellyfish and a significant amount of professional embarrassment on Severin's part. And the garden is laughing in the way that gardens laugh at the right kind of wedding, warmly, without artifice, because the people in it are actually happy, and happiness at this volume is contagious. Jonah is laughing too. He wants to be precise about this. He is not performing attendance at this wedding while internally managing something difficult. He is here. He is present. He is genuinely glad for Marcus and Saren, who have earned this afternoon by being honest with each other for 6 years about what they wanted and who they were. He is here because he was invited, and because he wanted to come, and because 3 years of unpacking his own grief and anger and confusion have produced, among other things, a person who can attend someone else's happiness without it requiring management. This is what recovery looks like. Not the absence of the thing that happened, the presence of something alongside it. The capacity to be in a garden on a warm afternoon and mean it when he smiles at the toast. I want to tell you about 3 specific moments from the 2 years Vivienne and I were together before I proposed. 3 moments that I registered, stored somewhere in my memory, and labeled incorrectly. The first was on our second date. We were at dinner, a place she had picked. A small Italian restaurant that did not have enough tables and made up for it in atmosphere. And somewhere in the middle of the meal, she said, out of nowhere, "Do you think people know when they're getting married? Do you think they actually know if it's right? Or do they just reach a point where the uncertainty becomes acceptable?" I thought about it. I said, "I think you know. I think the difference between uncertainty and doubt is pretty distinct. Uncertainty is just, this might not work. Doubt is something's wrong." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think that's a comforting way to think about it." I heard she finds this reassuring. I heard she's thinking philosophically about relationships, which makes sense because she thinks philosophically about everything. I heard she agrees with me. What I did not hear, looking at it now, she was asking a real question. She was not being philosophical. She was 24 years old, and she had already begun to wonder whether she understood the difference between certainty and the comfortable shape of something. And she was asking me, on our second date, whether I thought those 2 things were distinguishable. I gave her a reassuring answer. She filed it away. The second moment was in our 8th month together. We were at her sister Reeve's house for Sunday lunch. Reeve, who had been married for 2 years by then, and who I had always found warm and slightly guarded, the kind of person who laughs easily and discloses carefully. After lunch, when the men had drifted into the garden and the women were in the kitchen, I came back inside for something, and I heard Vivienne saying to her sister, "But how do you know it's the right reason? Not just a reason, the right one." And Reeve saying, "I'm not sure anyone knows that in advance, Viv." And Vivienne, "That's not reassuring." And Reeve, "No, I suppose it isn't." I picked up whatever I had come in for and went back outside. I told myself Vivienne was talking about a friend or a hypothetical, or the novel she was reading, which had a marriage in it. I told myself she was not talking about us. I look at that moment now and I think, Jonah, you heard it. You heard every word of it. You walked back outside and you told yourself a story that let you keep the picture you had built. And I do not blame myself for that. It is a very human thing to do, but I notice it now the way you notice a crack in a wall that has been there for years and that you have been walking past without looking at directly. The third moment was 6 months before the wedding. We were lying in bed on a Sunday morning, neither of us fully awake, the particular slow consciousness of a weekend morning, and she said, "Not to me, not quite, more to the ceiling. Do you ever feel like you've agreed to something before you understood all the terms?" I was half asleep. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Nothing." "Never mind." And she turned over and went back to sleep. I did not ask again. I am asking now, 3 years later, not of her, of myself. What would have happened if I had said, "Tell me the terms you don't understand yet. Tell me which part of this you haven't agreed to, because I want you to agree to it fully, or not at all." What would have happened if I had pushed? I think about this. I have thought about it a great deal, and my honest answer is, I don't know. I think she might not have had the language yet, even if I had asked. I think the language was still forming, but I think the asking, the signal that I wanted, the real version, the whole version, not the managed one, might have changed something, might have given her a place to put what she was carrying earlier when there was still time. I did not ask. I let the moment pass. I went back to sleep. I am telling you this, not to perform regret, but to be accurate. This is the story, reread from the outside side, and these are the moments that look different now than they did when I was standing inside them. He is also going to tell you something he has not told anyone. In the 3rd month after the wedding that wasn't, when the shock had become something more chronic and less acute, when he had stopped waiting for the phone to ring with an explanation and started understanding that the explanation was going to have to come from within rather than without, he went back to the restaurant where he had proposed to Vivienne, not to revisit anything. He went because it was a good restaurant and he was hungry, and his therapist had said in their 2nd session that avoiding places associated with painful memories was a form of giving the memory authority over your geography, and he had decided not to do that. So he went to the restaurant and he ordered what he always ordered there, and he sat in the same corner and he was fine. What he had not anticipated was that the maitre d' would recognize him. The man had been there 4 years, had been present on the evening of the proposal, had delivered the champagne with the specific professional warmth of someone who understands they are witnessing an occasion. He looked at Jonah and he's dining alone this evening, and Jonah said, "Yes," and the maitre d' said, "Of course, right this way." And his face registered nothing, and Jonah was grateful for that, for the professional courtesy of not referencing what was not referenced, and he ate his dinner alone, and it was fine. He thinks about that dinner sometimes, about the specific bravery of returning to a place, about what it costs to go back and what you get for the cost. I proposed in November, 8 months before the wedding. We were on a walk, one of those November walks that feel more like December, cold and particular. The light going early in the afternoon, leaves on the ground in the specific wet state of leaves that have been rained on for several days. We had walked this route before. There was a point where the path went under an old stone bridge, and the sound of the water changed, and the temperature dropped by several degrees, even in summer, and in November, it was very cold indeed. I stopped under the bridge. I had the ring in my pocket. I had been carrying it for 3 weeks. I had not practiced a speech because I do not believe in practiced speeches. I said what I actually felt, which was, I want to keep doing this, all of it, every version of it, the difficult versions and the easy ones, and the ones we haven't had yet. I want you to be the person I walk with for the rest of my life. She looked at me for a long time under that bridge. She said yes, her actual yes, which I can replay now in the way that important things get replayed, with the particular clarity that comes from knowing what came before it and after it. Her yes was warm. It was genuine. I was not wrong to believe it. She loved me. I need to be very clear about that, because the rest of this story can make it seem otherwise, and it would be inaccurate. She loved me. She said yes, and she meant it. But her yes had something attached to it that I heard as the shape of emotion, as the understandable weight of a large and permanent decision, and which I now understand was a question that she had not yet been able to ask out loud, a question that lived underneath the yes, like a separate current. I did not hear the question. I heard the yes. We told our families. Her mother cried in the good way. My mother cried in the good way and also made a spreadsheet of potential venues within 24 hours, which is a very specific kind of love. We told our friends. There were celebrations. There was a dinner where 12 people sat around a long table and said generous things about us, and I watched Vivienne across the table and thought, she is the person I am going to spend my life with, and that is simply the most important thing I have ever felt about anything. The 14 months of planning that followed were mostly good, not entirely. There were moments, particular moments that I have re-examined carefully, where something was slightly off, where her presence had a quality of being present, and somewhere else simultaneously, where she laughed at the right moments and said the right things and looked when I caught her when she didn't know I was looking, like someone carrying a weight that she had decided not to set down yet. I told myself, wedding planning is stressful. I told myself, this is the nature of a large and complicated commitment, and everyone feels this. I was not wrong, but I was also not entirely right. The night of our rehearsal dinner, 11 days before the wedding, she gave a toast. She spoke about us, about the specific things that had convinced her, about the moment under the bridge in November, and what she had been thinking when I asked. She was eloquent and funny, and the room was with her completely. She held my hand under the table throughout the dinner. She drove home with me, and we sat in the car in front of my building for an extra 20 minutes just talking, not wanting the evening to end. That night she said, I love you. Whatever happens, I need you to know that. I heard. I love you. I missed. Whatever happens. I am reading it now. I am hearing it now. Whatever happens. That was not a typical end of evening declaration. That was a woman who was beginning to understand, in the days before her wedding, what she was going to have to do, and who needed me to know, needed it desperately, that the love was real, even if the rest of it was going to be complicated. I said, I love you too. She kissed me. She got out of the car. She walked to the door of her mother's house, where she was staying the night before the wedding by tradition, and she turned and waved. I drove home thinking, tomorrow. She was thinking, I cannot do this. And she was right in that. The fact that she was right is the part that took me the longest to understand. Here is another moment he missed. This one he missed because it was too small to register at the time and too significant to miss in retrospect. 4 months before the wedding, a Sunday morning, they were at her mother's house for Sunday lunch, and before the meal, they were in the garden. Vivienne's mother had a garden that required attention and got it, and Vivienne had been helping with the roses, and he had come out to tell her lunch was ready, and she had been standing at the far end of the garden looking at the house. Not at him, at the house. She was looking at it with an expression that he had never seen on her face before, and which he did not have a name for then. He had a name for it now. It was the expression of someone who is looking at the version of their life they are about to choose, and trying to determine whether the image matches the feeling, whether the outside matches the inside, whether the thing that looks right is the thing that is right. She had turned when she heard him. She had smiled. She had come inside. He had not asked about the expression. He had not even registered it as an expression. He had registered it as Vivienne in the garden and then Vivienne coming inside. He had missed the middle part entirely. He is not sure now that asking about it would have changed anything. He is not sure she had the words for it yet. But he would have known there was something if he had looked. He would have known she was standing at a crossroads, and that the crossroads required something from him. His presence, his attention, his willingness to stand in the garden and say, "What are you thinking about? Tell me what you're thinking about. I have time." He did not stand in the garden. He went back inside. He has been standing in different gardens ever since. The week before the wedding, she called her sister 3 times. I know this because Reeve told me. 3 years later, at this same wedding I am standing at now. Told me because she thought I deserved to know, because she had been carrying her own version of that week and had decided at last, that I was ready to hear it. Reeve told me. She called me on the Monday and she said she needed to talk, not about logistics, about whether she was doing the right thing. I asked her what she meant and she told me. She told me everything about the questions she had been carrying, about not being certain, about being afraid that she was choosing you because you were right and safe and good, and that those things, as wonderful as they are, were not the same as being certain. I listened to this without interrupting. Reeve said, I asked her to tell you. I told her the kindest thing she could do for both of you was to tell you what she was carrying before the wedding rather than after the words. She said she didn't know how. She said she was afraid of what it would mean. I said, what did you tell her? Reeve said, I told her that you were a person who wanted the real version of things, that you had always been that kind of person, that if she told you the truth, you would, at minimum, be honest back. I said she didn't tell me. No, Reeve said, she didn't. Not until the morning. The morning. I had slept, against all probability, reasonably well the night before our wedding. I woke at 6, dressed, went to the venue with my best man Oliver by 8. The room was already prepared. Flowers, chairs, the particular organized calm of a space that is waiting for something. I stood at the end of the aisle and I thought, this is it. Today is the day that all of the 14 months of planning becomes a single afternoon and then becomes a life. I was happy, I want you to know that. Not performed happy, not managing anxiety through the pretense of happiness. Actually, genuinely, clearly happy. I was about to marry Vivienne Clare, and I was happy in the way that felt like a fact rather than a feeling. The guests arrived. My mother sat in the front row and already had a tissue ready. Oliver stood beside me and made a quiet joke about my tie, and I straightened it, and we watched the room fill, and I looked at the door at the back of the church. 8:47, the time that the wedding was supposed to start. 8:48, 8:50. Oliver said, she's probably just running a few minutes late. He said it lightly, with the voice you use when you are saying something reassuring and trying to believe it yourself. 8:55, the murmuring began. Not panic, the careful, specific murmuring of guests who are beginning to suspect that the timing has moved outside the normal range. 9:03, the coordinator came to me. She said, very quietly, that she had received a message. She said that Vivienne had asked her to let me know that she was sorry and that she was safe and that she needed to speak with me privately. The room, the flowers, the guests in their careful clothes, Oliver's hand on my shoulder, the specific, clean, total silence of a room that has understood something before the words have been spoken. I said, all right. I said it to the coordinator. I said it to Oliver. I said it to the room in a way, which is that I kept my face arranged and I breathed and I said, all right. I did not learn the whole of it until much later. That morning, she had woken at 5:43 in the room at her mother's house, and she had lain there for nearly an hour, and she had waited for the certainty that she had been hoping would arrive with the morning. It did not arrive. What arrived instead was clarity. And clarity, she told me 3 years later, was harder, because certainty would have simplified the morning. Clarity only made the decision she had been avoiding more visible. She called her sister. She said, I don't know if I can do this, Reeve said. Tell me what you mean, she told her. Reeve said, the kindest thing you can do for both of you is to be honest before the words, rather than after them. Vivienne got up. She did not put on the dress. She called the coordinator. She asked her to deliver a message. She could not call me directly, she told me later. I knew that if I heard your voice, I would come anyway, and coming for the wrong reason was worse than not coming at all. I stood in that room for a long time after the guests had begun to quietly leave. Oliver stayed. My mother stayed. Nobody said much. There was not much to say. My first coherent, the shock, not the feeling, but the first actual thought, was, I hope she is all right, not come back. Not why, not how could you? Just, I hope she is all right. I have thought about that thought a great deal over 3 years, about what it meant, about whether it was strange as a first thought for a person who had just been left at the altar. I decided eventually that it was not strange. It was simply the most honest thing I felt, and that whatever came after the grief, the anger, the long months of figuring out how to reorient a life that had been pointed in a specific direction and was now pointing somewhere uncharted. That first thought was the truest one. I hope she is all right. She was. She told me so eventually. She was, and then she worked to become more than all right. And that is what happened in the 3 years between that morning and this wedding. His best man, Oliver, came to find him 20 minutes after the guests had begun to leave. Oliver is a person of considerable practical efficiency. In the immediate aftermath of the wedding that wasn't, Oliver's practical efficiency was the most valuable thing anyone could have offered Jonah, because Jonah was not, in those first hours, capable of any practical decisions, and Oliver made all of them. He organized the car, he handled the conversations with immediate family, he made sure the caterers were paid and the flowers were distributed to the hospital they had designated as the secondary recipient. He did all of this with the specific focused calm of a person who has decided that the most loving thing he can do right now is manage the infrastructure while someone else manages their own interior. Jonah has thought about this many times, about the difference between being loved and being known. Oliver loved him, clearly and well. Oliver also knew him well enough to know that what he needed in those hours was not comfort. Comfort was going to be irrelevant for a while, but logistics, the management of the immediate practical reality, while the larger emotional reality had its time. He called Oliver from Edinburgh once, when he was doing the research for a piece he was writing. He called just to talk. Oliver answered on the second ring, and they talked for an hour about nothing and everything, and at the end Oliver said, "You sound different." Jonah said, "Different how?" Oliver said, "Further along." Jonah said, "Yes, I think I am." Oliver said, "Good," and they left it there, because that is what people who know each other well do. I see her across the garden at Marcus's wedding at 4:30. She is standing near the rose arch with a glass of something white, and she is talking to a woman I don't recognize, and she is laughing at something, and the laugh is, it is the real one. I know the difference. I have always known the difference. The real one comes from somewhere lower in her chest, and it costs her something, and it never arrives on cue. This is the real one. She has not seen me yet. I have perhaps 30 seconds to decide whether to stay where I am, or move toward the bar, or position myself somewhere that makes the eventual meeting feel accidental. I decide to do none of those things. I stand where I am and I wait, and when she turns and her eyes find me across the garden, I do not look away. She looks at me for a moment. Then she crosses the grass toward me. "Jonah," she says. "Vivienne," I say. We stand there for a moment. Then she says, "Are you all right being here?" The question surprises me. Not because it is strange, it is a reasonable question, but because it is a very Vivienne question. She has never led with social pleasantry when the actual question is more interesting. In 3 years, apparently, that has not changed. "Yes," I say, "genuinely, you?" "Yes," she says, also genuinely. We find a place to stand that is slightly apart from the rest of the guests, near the old stone wall at the edge of the garden, where the noise of the reception becomes background rather than foreground. She says, "I have wanted to say something to you for 3 years. I have drafted it several times. I haven't managed to say it yet." "Say it now," I say. "We have time." She nods. She holds her glass in both hands, the way she holds things when she is steadying herself. "I owe you an explanation," she says, "a real one. Not the version where I tell you the facts. I think you know the facts, or enough of them, but the version where I tell you what was actually happening inside me for the 2 years we were together and the 14 months we were planning the wedding. What I was actually carrying," I say. "I've had 3 years to form my own theories. I know. But you deserve the actual version," so she tells me. She tells me about the question she had been carrying since the second date, about the word uncertain and what she had meant by it, about her sister's marriage and what she had watched from close proximity. Not a bad marriage, not a dramatic failure, but a quiet misalignment between two people who loved each other and had nonetheless chosen each other for reasons that turned out to be partially about safety and familiarity. She had watched that. She had watched it carefully, and she had been afraid, in the way that specific fears work, that she was doing the same thing. She tells me about the phone calls with Reeve, about the 3 months before the wedding when the doubt had a voice she could not quiet, about the morning and the dress hanging on the door, and the clarity that arrived at 5:43 that was not the certainty she had been waiting for. She says, I want to be very clear about one thing. I loved you. I loved you throughout all of it. The doubt was never about whether I loved you. It was about whether I was certain that I was choosing you for the right reason, and whether I trusted myself enough to know the difference between love and the comfortable shape of something. I say, and now? Do you trust yourself now? She considers the question. Yes, she says. I spent 3 years learning what certainty feels like for me, what it feels like to know something all the way through, not just on the surface. And the thing I've been sitting with, for the last year especially, is that when I try to apply that clarity to what we had, when I look back at it with what I know now, I can see the difference between the doubt and the love, and the love was real. It was more real than I gave it credit for. I say, then why didn't you trust it? Because I didn't trust myself, she says, and there's a difference. A pause. I handled it in the worst possible way. The morning, the dress, the room full of people who had arranged their lives around that day. I was cowardly, dressed as someone making a brave decision. You deserve to have that conversation with me before the morning. I should have come to you weeks before, months before. I should have said, here is what I'm carrying. Help me understand it. Or, tell me if it's a reason to stop. I look at her. At the garden around us, the wedding in full soft noise, Marcus catching Saren's eye across the crowd and smiling without meaning to. I want to tell you something, I say, and I need you to know it's not about what we were or might have been. It's just accurate. She nods. The morning, I say, in that room, after everyone had started to understand. My first thought, the first actual, coherent thought was, I hope she is all right. She looks at me, something in her face changes. Not come back, I say. Not why. Just, I hope she's all right. And I've thought about that thought for 3 years, about what it meant. And I think it means something simple, that I loved you in the way that wanted you to be okay, even if okay didn't include me, even if okay was you somewhere else, choosing something you were actually certain of. She is very quiet for a moment. Then she says, that's exactly the problem. That's exactly why it was so hard. You loved me so well that you couldn't even be selfish about it. And I was so caught in my own uncertainty that I couldn't let you. I say, you were allowed to be uncertain. I was allowed to tell you, she says. That's the difference. Yes, I say, that is the difference. We stand there for a moment. The garden is full of people who are happy for Marcus and Saren, and who are eating well and talking about ordinary things. And we are standing at the edge of all of it, having the conversation that should have been had 3 years ago. She is talking about the 3 years now, about the specific texture of them, not the drama. She is not, as he has always appreciated, a person who reaches for drama when accuracy is available. The texture, the first year of understanding what she had done, in the specific way that you understand things that you have avoided understanding until you are ready. The second year of figuring out what she actually wanted, which turned out to be more work than she had expected, because the wanting had been buried under several layers of assumption. The third year of being, at last, the person she had been trying to be, not perfectly, not completely, but recognizably herself in a way she had not been in the 2 years of uncertainty before the wedding. He listens. He has always been good at listening, which is one of the things she had loved about him, and which she says now, in passing, in the middle of describing the second year. She says, you were always good at listening. I think part of me was afraid of that, of being with someone who would hear what I was actually saying, rather than the version I was managing. He looks at her. She says, I wasn't ready to be heard that accurately, and I am now. And that's one of the things the 3 years gave me. He does not say, I would have listened then too. He knows she knows that. He knows that it was not the quality of the listening, but her readiness to be listened to. That was the variable. He files this away as one of the true things she has said tonight. One of the things that recontextualizes something he has been holding without understanding it. We talk for a long time, long enough that the light changes. The particular change of garden light in the late afternoon, going from gold to something softer. The kind of light that makes people look like earlier, gentler versions of themselves. She tells me about the 3 years, not the summary, the actual 3 years. What she learned about herself. What she did with the clarity once she found it. How she learned to distinguish between what she wanted and what she thought she was supposed to want. She is not the same person. I can hear it. The person who had drinks at this kind of party and talked about novels and looked at me across tables. She is still in there, but there is more around her now. More substance. More certainty. The real kind. The kind she was looking for. I tell her about my 3 years. Not the grief. She already carries enough about the grief, but the other parts. The way I eventually stopped asking what I had missed and started asking what I wanted now. The work I took on. The friendship I invested in. The specific morning, about 8 months after the wedding that wasn't, when I woke up and had 1 hour before the grief arrived. And in that hour I felt not happy, not healed, just like a person who was still here and who was going to be okay. She listens to all of it without looking away. At some point she says, you said something earlier about choosing you for the right reason. I want to answer that more fully. You don't have to. I want to. She turns to face me more directly. In 3 years, I've learned what certainty feels like. Actual certainty. Not comfort, not familiarity, not the absence of doubt, but the specific feeling of knowing something all the way through. And I've been sitting with something for the last year. When I apply that clarity to what we had, I don't get the same answer I got 3 years ago. I don't get, you were safe and familiar, and I couldn't tell the difference. I get, I loved you with the full weight of who I was at that time, and I was too afraid of my own uncertainty to trust it. I say, what does that mean now? What does that mean for now? She says, I don't know yet. I'm not standing here asking for something. I've lost the right to ask for things. I'm just telling you the true version. The one I couldn't tell 3 years ago. I look at her, at the specific quality of her face in this garden light, which is the same quality it has always had. That combination of directness and something held in reserve, like a person who is giving you a great deal, but also has more, always more, if you stay long enough to receive it. I want to say something, I say, and I'm going to ask you to hear it as what it is, not as something more. Okay. Every choice I made in 3 years about what I wanted, about who I wanted to be with, about what felt right, has had you as the reference point, not as a standard someone else has to meet, as the reference point for what it feels like when something is actually real, when someone is actually the right person, not because you are irreplaceable in some absolute sense, but because what we had was true. It was as true as anything I've experienced. And I want you to know that I know that now, even though I didn't know how to name it when it was happening. She is very still. So when I say I never stopped loving you, I say, I want to be accurate about what I mean. I don't mean I've been waiting. I don't mean I've been unable to move. I mean that the love was real and I have never pretended it wasn't. And I have never revised it into something smaller than it was in order to make the loss easier to carry. No, she says. You wouldn't. No, I agree. A pause. She says, what do we do with this, with right now? I say, I don't know, but I think we start by having dinner. Not tonight. Tonight is Marcus's, but sometime. I think we have a conversation that is not about the past. I think we find out who each other is now, without it having to be anything other than that. She says, is that possible? After everything? I say, I think the version of you who left was making the right decision for the wrong reasons. And I think the version of us that never finished the conversation was making an error of omission. And I think 3 years has given both of us enough to try a different version if we want to. She looks at me for a long moment. She says, I want to. I say, then I'll call you. She nods. She smiles. The real one. The one that costs her something. I catch it the way you catch a specific thing you have been waiting to see again, and were not certain you would. She walks back toward the garden. I watch her go. I stand at the edge of that old stone wall and I look at the garden full of people who are happy for Marcus and Saren. And I think, she left me at the altar and I never stopped loving her. But the version I believe in now is not the version of loving someone who left. It is the version of loving someone who finally came back to herself, fully, all the way, and who had the courage, 3 years later, in a garden at someone else's wedding, to say the true thing at last. That is not a tragic ending. It is the beginning of a different story, one that both of us are finally ready for, and this time, we are going to tell each other the truth. He watches her walk back across the garden to the table where her friend is sitting. She moves through the crowd with the ease of someone who is comfortable in their own body in a way that she was not, he thinks, always. Or maybe she was, and he never quite saw it at this particular angle. The angle of someone watching rather than being watched. Marcus catches his eye from across the garden. He raises his glass. Jonah raises his. Marcus gives him the look of a person who knows more than he is saying and has decided to say none of it tonight, because tonight is not the night for it. Tonight is for Saren and the garden and the excellent food. Jonah nods. He is grateful. He is also, for the first time in 3 years, genuinely curious about the future. Not hopeful in the performative sense, not telling himself a story about what might happen that he needs to believe in order to get through. Curious. The way you are curious about something real. The way you are curious when you do not know the answer and you are interested in finding it out. This is what 3 years of honest work produces. Not resolution, curiosity. The capacity to be interested in what comes next without needing to control it. She said, what do we do with this? And he said, I don't know yet. And the don't know yet was the most truthful thing. He does not know yet, but he is interested in finding out. And being interested, he has learned, is the beginning of everything.